ABC News live coverage of the Blackout of 2003 continues. Once again from Washington, Ted Koppel.
And once again, just a quick reprise. 50 million people affected tonight, the biggest electrical blackout in American history. 20 million more than were affected in the previously largest incident of this kind back in 1965. But mercifully, it seems to be relatively brief in duration. This happened at about 4:10 p.m. Eastern Time. So we're talking about 5.5 hours ago, and it now looks as though in scattered areas around New York City that the electricity is coming back up again. It's also appearing to come back up in parts of northern New Jersey, and we're told that it's coming back up in Detroit. So good news by and large in that there does not appear to have been any major disaster anywhere. I mentioned to you about those 140 miners who are temporarily trapped, some of them as much as 4,000 feet, others just a few hundred feet below the surface. But we just talked to a police sergeant in that community, and he told me that the expectation is that they are in no immediate danger and they should be able to get them out of there again. So by and large, it could have been a lot worse. But let's go now to Linda Douglas, who has been standing by all evening at Reagan National Airport here on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. And Linda, I understand you've prepared a report for us.
Well, and here at Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C., where the power has been on, there were nevertheless many frustrated passengers who just could not get to New York tonight. Now, we just want to update a little bit the news about the transportation situation. Two of the busiest airports in New York, LaGuardia and Newark Airport, are now up and running again. And also the Cleveland Airport is up and running again. As you reported earlier, the big airport, JFK Airport, not yet. Planes that were to fly to JFK are not being permitted yet to take off because there still are some problems there. And the trains are still slowing down. A handful of them in the very busy Northeast corridor that handles 35,000 passengers a day between Washington, Boston, and New York. A handful of trains are starting to go into New York now, but Amtrak does not want passengers going to New York trying to get on those trains. It's still going to be absolutely a transportation mess tomorrow. Some planes have landed at those airports, but they could not be easily moved to the gates because of the power outage. And some planes had taken off from those airports, but the only passengers being allowed to board were those who were already screened before the power went out. The screening machines were not working. All around the country, there is a ripple effect. Here at Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C., the crowd of stranded passengers is growing.
Since I'm on the 8 o'clock, is it canceled at this time?
Up to 8 o'clock is canceled. At least one flight left at 9 o'clock. They're going to cancel that. That will be canceled.
Hundreds of people spent an hour or more trapped underground in the subways, a terrifying experience on any day. The lights were out. It was incredibly hot. Some were finally rescued, pulled out by city workers and fellow New Yorkers who helped them climb out of the tunnels into the light. Passengers on the crowded Amtrak train routes between Boston, New York, and Washington were turned around in several cases. Amtrak suspended service along much of the Northeast corridor.
I have meetings all day tomorrow in New York I'm not going to make.
Thousands were trapped in elevators and were forced to troop down high-rise stairwells. One woman said all she could think about was September 11th. Because cell phones went out, fights broke out at some payphones. A CNN reporter was surrounded by people who wanted to call home. They grabbed the phone from her hand and told her to leave. Although admissions to hospitals in New York was limited, ABC News surveyed several hospitals, and most reported that surgery was not disrupted and the patients were fine. Power went out at many prisons in the area as well, though they were luckily saved by backup generators. And the power was out in ATM machines, so people could not get cash. Power was out in cash registers, so they couldn't buy things if they wanted to. But as we've been reporting tonight, those problems should all be going away by tomorrow, Ted.
Thank you very much, Linda Douglas. And that reminds me of an item that I read, must be about an hour and a half ago, but the New York Stock Exchange expects to be up again tomorrow, even if they have to do it on generators. And a spokesman for the New York Stock Exchange said that none of the trading information was lost because of the power outage earlier this evening. Let's go now to Terry Moran, who is also down here in Washington. And I should tell you, if you're seeing the lights on down here in Washington, the lights have not been off. Washington is unaffected. Philadelphia is unaffected. It's only as we get up north into northern Pennsylvania that we begin to see some of the impact of what's happened today. Terry Moran at the White House, can you hear me?
I sure can, Ted.
It's an empty White House this evening. The president's either out at the ranch or, as he is this evening, on a campaign swing to raise a little money in California. But we heard from him earlier today. You want to give us a briefing on what he had to say this evening?
Sure, it is an empty White House at this end. However, just like so many of the local officials that you've been talking to around the country, it's going to be a long night for White House officials. Their job has been to coordinate the federal response to this. The lead on that is the president, and one of his jobs is that public role he has at a moment like this to try to communicate command and calm. He did that. He came before cameras a little bit earlier tonight, and he said that he was certain that this was not a terrorist problem. He urged people to remain calm. He complimented governors and mayors and local officials on their response, and the people of the affected areas for remaining calm. Here at the White House, the response has been coordinated in 3 areas: investigation, assistance, and security. The investigation of what happened is being coordinated out of the Department of Energy. They're working with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and Canadian and local officials to get to the bottom of this. Assistance, the federal government offered quite a bit of assistance, from ferry capability and teams of doctors and extra ventilators and hospital equipment, all the way to Federal Emergency Management Agency command and control teams. But we are told that right down the line, local officials have said, thanks, but we can handle it on our own at this moment. And that has given a lot of satisfaction to the federal officials, who say that it may be that the Homeland Security efforts over the past couple of years to beef up the country's capability of responding to a terrorist attack made possible the kind of efficient response that was seen right across the board tonight and this afternoon, given this power outage.
I don't want to put you on the spot, Terry, but can you give me some sense of what the Office of Homeland Security has had to do with what any of these municipalities, or for that matter states, have been doing over the past few hours?
Sure. The Department of Homeland Security, as it is now, is one of the main points of interfacing, if you will, between the federal government and the affected areas. One of the first concerns was an investigation of whether or not this was terrorism related. The Federal Emergency Management Agency is now part of that Department of Homeland Security, and they got up and running, offering assistance. And the secretary of that department, former Pennsylvania Governor Tom Ridge, has been in touch with both the president and local officials coordinating this federal response. And so it has been, if you will, a kind of test run of the emergency response that was set up in the federal government after 9/11.
All right, Terry Moran at the White House this evening. Thanks very much indeed. And we're going to take another short break. I'll be back with more in a moment.
ABC News live coverage of the Blackout of 2003 will continue in a moment.